I learned something recently, and that is the road to becoming a scientist is quite different to the road to becoming a humanist. I learned this from watching Simon Clarke's video about how he became a researcher, and I realized how different it is to my story. So I wanted to film this video to give you an idea of how I became a researcher. Simon uses this system of leveling up. I was never a video game player, so I don't really have a system to use. So I'm just gonna use his. I guess my level 0 was really in my first year of my undergraduate degree, which was a Bachelor of Arts at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. And I did 3 majors: classics, archaeology and philosophy, and I did a modern history minor. The first real research project that I did was in my first year, and it was really just an essay, a 1,500-word essay for classical mythology, but I got to pick my own topic, and this was the first time that I'd been given the freedom to write about what I wanted to write about. So I wrote a pretty terrible, in hindsight, essay with the title "The Perfect Wife in Greek Mythology." I actually argued that Helen was a better wife than Penelope, which perhaps was the beginning of my tenure as an ancient historian rather than a classicist, because I cared about the historical context, though I'm not sure that came across in my essay. So a couple of big things from this essay that I had to learn really quickly. Because it was my own topic, there wasn't a pre-prepared bibliography for me to begin at. I had to very quickly come to terms with databases like JSTOR and even Google Scholar, ProQuest, Muse, places I could find scholarship. But more than that, I really had to come to grips with how to find and use primary source material. And I guess the main thing that we do in arts and humanities degrees is write essays. So these are skills that kind of developed really slowly over time. And it wasn't until I got to my 3rd year that I had another really big challenge. I did a summer course, intensive summer course in Greece. And one of the things that I had to write was an archaeological based essay. My archaeology training had been theoretical, not about being on site and looking and using and figuring things out. And this was the first time that I wrote anything from a practical archaeology perspective. And I wrote about Mycenaean palatial centers. And I didn't write anything groundbreaking, obviously, but it was a chance for me to start gaining some new skills. And those are skills which I have continued to develop, and I still use material culture and archaeology in my work now. Again, another step away from classics and towards ancient history. So my 3rd, am I up to 3? So my 3rd big project was my honours thesis. In Australia, a Bachelor of Arts is a standalone degree, and then you do an extra year on top of that, and it includes some elements of coursework and a thesis. And it's a considerable thesis. So mine, I think, is just over 20,000 words. And I wrote about colonization and religious pollution. And this was a time when I really struggled with sources. I had to learn really quickly about using sources from later periods and how to not make my work anachronistic. And I am going to tell you that I didn't really succeed all that well at it. But in the examination and sort of going forward after this was the first work also that I presented at a conference, and all of these tiny steps helped me to figure out how to use these sources, how we can use a source from the 2nd century to say something about the 2nd century CE, to say something about the 5th century BCE. And we can, but we need to be conscious and aware that we're doing things in a certain way. So I did quite well in that and started a master's. And again, I sort of decided to move in a completely different direction, because why wouldn't you do that? So my master's thesis was about rites of passage and using models of rites of passage, particularly male coming of age rituals, to reread Aeschylus's Eumenides. If you haven't, I would stop what you are doing right now and go and read Aeschylus's Eumenides, because it is brilliant. So this was really where everything started to come together, because I was using skills of reading literature, reading fictional works, using tragedy, which is an inherently performative, active kind of poetry, and also using ritual theory and some of the things which would sort of lead into my PhD. And it all came together surprisingly well, although I have never published anything from my master's. I did present at a couple of big conferences. I had my first opportunity to present at an international conference from that research. And it's work that really has informed me as a person, as a researcher, because it was a synthesis. It was a moment where things just started to click, where the work that I had done building skills in looking at archaeological sites and material culture, and the skills that I had built up looking at poetry, and the skills that I had built up looking at historical sources, and the skills that I had built up in reading back from later sources to earlier periods. And that's one of the problems with my period. There's not a lot of evidence. And then my PhD. There's not really that much to say about my PhD. I'm not, in humanities degrees, you don't ever really stop and learn new skills, unless you have to stop and learn a language, or I guess for archival research and obviously practical archaeology, where you're going out into the field. There are times when you do have to stop and learn new skills, but for the kind of work that I do, it's not like that. You just gradually inch closer and closer. You get better at reading texts. You get better at figuring out the Greek or Latin or whatever. You just incrementally get better. So when Simon said at the beginning of his video, comparing yourself as an early undergraduate to even master's, PhD students, people like me now, teaching fellows or early career researchers, up to sort of your eminent professors, they're just further along the path than you, but you're walking the same path. But you have to have faith that you are on the right path, and that the people above you, the people who are teaching you and supervising you, are going to give you the best advice that they can. And that sort of leads me to where I am now, which is kind of juggling two projects. One is the continuation of my PhD, where I'm rewriting it into a study that kind of makes more sense to me now, and that will become a book, which is incredibly scary and exciting. And then the other part of my new work is new work. I'm now at a point where I'm having ideas and I can see beyond the next project. And that's incredibly exciting, being able to say, do you know what? My next book is going to be about basket weaving, underwater, and coral, or whatever the case may be. So have some faith, and no two paths are the same. And that is the other major reason that I wanted to film this video. Not because I want this to be like a science versus humanities, but because everybody's path is different, and some fields will be about giant steps of new learning new skills and jumping up. And some fields, like mine, are about just slowly trudging up the hill, and you'll get there. So if you have any questions about my research path, please leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear your research stories as well, how you became a researcher and where you're at. So thank you so much for watching this video, and if you've liked it, please share, please subscribe. What's going on with my hair? I don't know. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.